She built a $4 million mansion on land that wasn't hers. It was mine. And somehow, the entire world acted like that was perfectly fine. No questions, no pushback from the city, just paperwork quietly shuffled into the right drawers by the right people. But here's the thing about being a high school geography teacher. You spend your life looking at maps. You learn that lines on a paper aren't just ink. They're history, their ownership, and their boundaries that you don't get to cross just because you have a fat bank account and an attitude problem. What she buried under that marble foyer and that heated infinity pool wasn't just property. It was a promise someone made to this neighborhood 30 years ago, a promise she hoped no one would ever dig up. But I did. I dug it up, I dusted it off, and I used it to bring her entire empire crashing down. I'm Connor, and if you've ever been pushed around by someone who thought their money made them untouchable, you're going to want to hear this. Because what happened between me and the president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA isn't just a property dispute. It's a war story. Let's go back to the beginning, before the lawyers and the demolition crews. I was 35 years old, tired of renting shoebox apartments where I could hear my neighbors sneezing through the drywall. I wanted roots. I wanted quiet. So when I found this vacant lot in Meadowbrook Estates, it felt like hitting the lottery. It wasn't much, just a patch of overgrown grass shaded by these massive, ancient oak trees. But it was affordable, and it was mine. I remember standing there the day after closing, just breathing in the air, visualizing a small porch, maybe a dog running around. It was peaceful. For exactly 20 minutes. That's when I heard the gravel crunch. A pristine, pearl-white Escalade rolled up to the curb, gleaming like a spaceship that had landed in a cornfield. The window rolled down, and there she was. Cheryl. She didn't just step out of the car. She deployed. She was wearing a beige pantsuit that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection, and she held a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Welcome to Meadowbrook," she said. It didn't sound like a greeting. It sounded like a warning. She walked onto my lot, with the confidence of someone who owned the very air we were breathing. Her eyes were scanning everything, cataloging the weeds, the pile of lumber I'd staged, the surveyor's stakes. You could see her doing the mental math, calculating exactly how much of a nuisance I was going to be. "I'm Cheryl," she said, extending a hand that felt as cold as marble. "HOA president. We like to get off on the right foot here. I assume you've read the covenants." Before I could answer, she reached into that massive SUV and pulled out a binder. I'm not exaggerating. This thing was 3 inches thick. She dropped it into my hands, and the weight of it nearly pulled my arms down. Section 4, Paragraph 2. No construction materials visible from the street for more than 24 hours. She recited without looking at the book. Section 9. Grass height must be maintained at 2.5 inches. Not 3. Not 2. 2.5. And mailboxes? 42 inches tall. Exactly. We had to have the Johnsons tear theirs out last week. It was 43. She smiled then, a tight, practiced grimace that didn't reach her eyes. "We have standards, Connor. Property values are everything. We don't do rustic here." She spent the next 20 minutes lecturing me on the 50 shades of beige I was allowed to paint my future house. By the time she drove off, trailing a cloud of expensive perfume, I felt like I was back in detention. But as the dust settled, my neighbor from across the street, an elderly guy named Arthur, wandered over. Arthur was the anti-Cheryl. He wore suspenders, had dirt under his fingernails, and looked like he actually enjoyed being alive. "Don't mind her," Arthur said, leaning on his garden hoe. "She thinks she's the Queen of England. Just keep your head down." Then he looked at my lot, and his expression changed. It got a little wistful. You know, back in the early 90s, before the big houses went up, the city had big plans for this strip of land. They were going to put a park right here. Playground, walking trails, the works. He kicked at a tuft of grass. "Funny how things just disappear, isn't it?" That comment stuck with me. Funny how things just disappear. 3 weeks later, I'm drinking my morning coffee, trying to figure out why my building permit is taking so long, when the mailman hands me a certified letter. Urgent. Red letters. Return address, Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I opened it. Notice of unauthorized construction activity. It claimed I was encroaching on recently acquired HOA common area and demanded I halt all building immediately. Legal action would be pursued. I walked outside. I hadn't built anything yet. I hadn't even poured a foundation. I was still clearing brush. How could I be encroaching? I drove down to the county clerk's office to pull the latest plat maps. And that's when I saw it. A narrow strip of land, running right along my eastern boundary line. The exact spot where my driveway needed to go had been sold. It was labeled public surplus on the old maps, but now the owner was listed as Meadowbrook HOA. Cheryl had bought the land right out from under me. And looking at the map, it wasn't just a random strip. It was a blockade. She had purchased a sliver of land that effectively landlocked the best buildable spot on my lot. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the survey. The purchase price listed was laughable. Pennies on the dollar. How did she even know it was for sale? Public surplus land doesn't just get advertised in the weekly newsletter. You have to know where to look, or who to ask. I decided to dig deeper. I'm a geography teacher. Research is what I do. I spent my weekend at the city planning office, breathing in dust and fluorescent light. And what I found was a pattern. Over the last 5 years, Cheryl, acting through the HOA, had quietly purchased 7 different parcels of abandoned or unclaimed land in the neighborhood. Every single one of them was strategic. A buffer zone here, a view easement there. She was expanding the HOA's footprint, piece by piece. But the biggest chunk? It was the land directly adjacent to my lot. And right in the middle of that acquired land, construction crews were already breaking ground. I drove by later that day. It wasn't a community garden. It wasn't a walking trail. It was a foundation. A massive, sprawling foundation for a guest house and a pool complex that connected directly to Cheryl's existing property. She wasn't buying land for the HOA. She was buying it for herself, using the HOA as a front, and then presumably transferring the title or leasing it back for $1 a year. It was a land grab, plain and simple. I went to the city planner, a guy named Ben who looked like he had surrendered to the bureaucracy 20 years ago. This land, I said, pointing to the map. How was this sold without a public hearing? Ben shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Surplus land. It's a direct sale. If nobody claims it, the city unloads it to the adjacent owner to save on maintenance. But I'm the adjacent owner, I said. Nobody asked me. The HOA is also adjacent, Ben mumbled, typing furiously on a computer that wasn't even on. Look, it's done. The paperwork is filed. Something about his nervousness told me I was pulling on a thread that people didn't want pulled. I went to the historical archives. If the digital records were being stonewalled, I needed the paper trail. I found a file labeled Harmony Park Proposal, 1992. I opened it, and my heart stopped. There it was. A fully approved, fully funded city project. $2.3 million allocated for Harmony Park. And the map? The map showed the park covering not just the strip Cheryl bought, but the land her current house sat on, and the land I had just bought. Wait, if the park was funded, where was it? I flipped through the pages. Budgets approved. Contractors hired. Groundbreaking photos. Groundbreaking photos. There were pictures of a mayor in 1993 holding a golden shovel. There were pictures of swing sets being installed. There were pictures of a pavilion. The park hadn't just been planned. It had been built. I sat there in the silence of the library, the hum of the air conditioner loud in my ears. A $2.3 million park had been built in 1994. And now, in 2023, it was gone. Erased. Replaced by Cheryl's mansion and a few vacant lots. How do you make a park disappear? I photocopied everything. The budget, the photos, the original boundary lines. The next day, I sent a formal letter to the HOA board. I didn't accuse anyone yet. I just asked for clarification. Regarding the boundary discrepancy between the 1992 Harmony Park survey and current HOA holdings. I attached the photos. 2 days later, my phone rang. Connor, Cheryl's voice purred. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. Why don't you come by for tea? We can chat privately. Privately? I asked. Cheryl, if this is just a paperwork error, you can explain it at the monthly meeting next week. The silence on the line was heavy. I don't think that's necessary, she said, the ice creeping back in. Some things are better handled, quietly. We can make your building permit issues go away. We can be very helpful neighbors. I'm good, I said. Suit yourself, she snapped. But remember, Connor, I decide who fits in this neighborhood. The war started the next morning. It wasn't a loud war. It was a paper war. I woke up to 3 violation notices on my door. Grass height. Trash bin visibility. Unauthorized vehicle. My truck was in the driveway. My grass was mowed. My trash bin was behind the fence. It didn't matter. They fined me. $50 here. $100 there. Then the rumors started. I'd walk into the grocery store, and neighbors would turn away. I heard the whispers. I heard he's broke. I heard he has a criminal record. Cheryl says he's unstable. She was isolating me. She was painting me as the crazy guy obsessed with old maps, the conspiracy theorist who wouldn't let the nice lady build her pool. Then came the tires. I walked out on a Tuesday to find all 4 tires on my truck slashed. Flat to the rim. No witnesses. No cameras. Just a clear message, leave. I stood there in the driveway, looking at my truck, looking at Cheryl's massive house on the hill, watching the construction crew pour the concrete for her stolen pool. I wanted to quit. I really did. I calculated the loss if I just sold the land and walked away. It would be cheaper. It would be safer. But then I looked at the photo from the archive. A picture of a little girl on a swing set, right where Cheryl's guest house now stood. A public park. Stolen. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I called Frank Miller. Frank was an old-school litigator, the kind of guy who wore rumpled suits and knew where all the bodies were buried in county politics. I laid it all out for him. The park. The disappearance. The slashed tires. Frank looked at the documents for a long time. "Connor," he said, taking off his glasses. "If you're right about this, if they erased a public asset, this isn't just zoning fraud. This is grand larceny. This is corruption. But you need to know, if we swing at the Queen, we better not miss." We filed a lawsuit alleging fraudulent property acquisition and theft of public land. Cheryl countersued immediately. Harassment, defamation, interference with business. She hired a legal team that cost more than my life earnings. The first hearing was a disaster. Her lawyer was smooth. He painted me as a disgruntled neighbor with a vendetta. He called the 1992 documents outdated proposals that were never finalized. He argued that the land had been legally rezoned and sold decades ago. The judge, a guy who looked like he played golf with Cheryl's husband, dismissed our motion for an injunction. "Mr. Connor," he said, "unless you have concrete proof of fraud, I suggest you stop wasting the court's time." I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I'd been kicked in the gut. Cheryl was there by her Mercedes. She didn't say a word. She just smiled. That victorious, untouchable smile. I went home. I sat in the dark. I was done. Then Frank called. "Connor," he said, his voice buzzing with energy. "I found someone." I was digging through the old payroll records for the Parks Department. I found the maintenance supervisor from 1995, a guy named Richard Davies. So, he didn't just work on the park, Frank said. He says he was ordered to destroy it. We met Richard at a diner on the edge of town. He was 70 years old, shaking, looking over his shoulder like he expected a hitman. "I can't talk about this," Richard said, gripping his coffee cup. "They ruined people back then." "Richard," I said, "they're ruining people now. They stole it. All of it." Richard looked at me. He saw the desperation. He sighed. "It was beautiful," he said softly. "We finished it in '94. Swings, picnic tables, a gazebo. The whole neighborhood used it. Then, in '98, Cheryl got elected to the HOA board. The first thing she did was complain about the noise. She said the park attracted undesirables. So she closed it. Worse, Richard said. She systematically dismantled it. She filed safety complaints that were fake. She claimed the swings were rusted. She claimed the gazebo was structurally unsound. She forced the city to condemn it piece by piece. And once it was condemned, she argued that it was a blight. She lobbied the city council, backroom deals, I'm sure, to sell the useless land to the HOA for maintenance purposes. And then she just took it? She waited, Richard said. She waited 10 years until people forgot. Then she started rezoning it. Quietly, absorbing it into her own lot. "We need you to testify," Frank said. Richard shook his head. "It's my word against hers. She has paperwork saying it was a safety hazard. Do you have proof it wasn't?" I asked. Richard reached into his bag. He pulled out a photo album. "I kept these because I was proud of my work, and because I knew someday someone would ask." He opened the book. There were photos dated 1998, the year she started the demolition. Photos of perfectly good equipment being torn down. But then he turned the page. "And I have these," he said. "Copies of the maintenance logs. I refused to sign off on the safety violations. See here? Inspection passed. Equipment optimal." She forged my signature on the condemnation order. That's why I quit. The smoking gun. We went back to court. This time, the gallery was packed. Word had gotten out. The neighborhood was curious. Cheryl sat there, looking bored, checking her watch. Frank stood up. Your Honor, we would like to submit new evidence. Cheryl's lawyer objected. This is a fishing expedition. It's not fishing when you catch a shark, Frank said. We call Richard Davies to the stand. Cheryl's head snapped up. For the first time, the mask slipped. She recognized the name. Richard took the stand. He was nervous, but he told his story. He talked about the park. He talked about the fake inspections. Then Frank put the maintenance logs on the projector. Mrs. Sterling, Frank said, turning to Cheryl. Is this your signature authorizing the demolition based on safety failures? I relied on the experts, she stammered. Mr. Davies was the expert, Frank said. And this is his log from the day before the demolition order, stating the equipment was perfect. And here is the condemnation order, signed by you, citing a report that doesn't exist. The courtroom was silent. And finally, Frank said, let's look at the land. He put up a side-by-side photo. On the left, a photo from 1996. Kids playing on a swing set. Families having a picnic. On the right, a current photo of Cheryl's construction site. Can you explain to the court, Frank asked, his voice ringing off the walls, how a children's playground became your private swimming pool? Cheryl stood up. I improved the neighborhood. It was loud. It was messy. I brought value. You stole public land, Frank said, and you forged documents to do it. Cheryl looked around the room. She looked for support. But the neighbors, the people she had bullied, the people she had lied to, were staring at her with pure disgust. She realized, in that moment, that her money couldn't buy her way out of this. She slumped back into her chair. She didn't say another word. The verdict wasn't just a win, it was an exorcism. The judge, clearly realizing he had been played in the first hearing, came down with the wrath of God. He found overwhelming evidence of fraud, forgery, and theft of public assets. He ordered the immediate forfeiture of all illegally obtained land. He ordered Cheryl to reimburse the city for the value of the park, adjusted for inflation, plus punitive damages. The total came to over $4 million. And the mansion? The addition she was building? Condemned, the judge ruled. Any structure built on stolen public land is to be removed at the defendant's expense within 30 days. Cheryl's empire didn't just fall, it was bulldozed. She was indicted a week later on fraud charges. The HOA board was dissolved and reorganized. But the best part came 6 months later. I stood on my front porch, coffee in hand. The construction noise was gone. The white Escalade was gone. Repoed, I heard. Across the way, where the mansion's foundation used to be, there was something else. Swings. The city, embarrassed by the scandal and flush with Cheryl's restitution money, had restored Harmony Park. I walked over. It was a Saturday. There were kids running around. There were parents sitting on benches. My elderly neighbor, Arthur, was there, sitting under the oak tree. He looked up and smiled. Told you it was a nice park. Yeah, I said. It really is. A little girl ran past me, laughing, chasing a ball right through the spot where Cheryl's master bedroom would have been. I realized then that this wasn't about property lines. It wasn't about me winning. It was about this. It was about giving the space back to the people it belonged to. Cheryl thought she could pave over history. She thought if she buried the past deep enough, no one would remember. But land has a memory. Communities have a memory. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to dig a little deeper to remind everyone what was lost. I'm still the geography teacher. I still live in my modest house. But now, when I look out my window, I don't see a monument to greed. I see a community. And honestly, that view is worth more than $4 million. So, if you're out there and you feel like the little guy, like you're being paved over, don't quit. Read the fine print. Check the maps. Ask the questions they don't want you to ask. Because you never know what's buried right under your feet. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Did you win? And if you like this story, hit that like button and subscribe to HOA Stories. We've got plenty more battles to fight. Stay safe out there.